Yeah.
Okay?
Well,
You're
you
not
know,
going to get a fair trial. They will
a good
suck up
analogy,
all your money.
a good analogy here would be how this foster care program all started with the Christians who came into native villages and said, "My heavens, you do not live properly. You know,
You're
this
not
is
Christians.
not the
You're
way.
heathens.
If you're going to live in Canada or America, this is not the way you're going to be living. We know how you should live. Let us take your children and show them how they should live so that they can come back and show you how they should live."
You're funny, Alvin.
You know?
Let us take your children, like as if there was an option there.
Yeah, well, there was no option because they just came in and snatched them, and we see where that led.
Civilize
You know?
them.
Yeah, and so anyways, to civilize, under,
That's
one God,
Yeah.
and that's the thing is that, there's probably a lot of gods out there,
And what
one
they
for every
actually
culture.
ended up doing
And,
was destroying, whereas these Christian people thought it was such a great idea. I know so many Native people who are so against Christianity because of what happened to them because of the priests,
And pagan society.
and nuns.
yeah, and pagan too, yeah, and pagan societies, and it's a real
No, but
shame
natives
that
that firsthand felt the effects and will have nothing to do with, you mention a Bible and they're, get out of here,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And that's too bad too, because there's a lot of good things in the Bible. There's a lot of positive messages in the Bible. It was written for a reason, and
You don't have to be Christian to realize that some of those, old sayings in there are very true.
Yeah.
So the other day I was looking on the website under Auschwitz, which was a Nazi death camp, and I was reading some of the interviews by the few people that managed to survive and get out of there alive, and they were talking about all the stuff that happened up to going to the death camp, and we're talking whole families were herded, the mothers, the fathers, the children, the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, all of them were herded into cattle cars and then taken and then stripped naked, all their possessions taken into two different lineups, and most of those people ended up going into what was called the long walk, which was basically what people do to cows now, where they put up two big walls and the cows are herded and there's only one way to go, and that's to the execution block. And as funny thing with cows is that as they get closer and closer to it, they start to smell the death and they start to freak out, but there's nowhere to go because there's other cows behind them pushing, and they just have to keep going in that direction. And whole families were exterminated, and some of the people who weren't gassed right away, they were just put into work camps, and they had to watch the family members that weren't gassed be tortured and devastated, and what must have been happening to those people emotionally and personally. When I watched World War II movies, I never got it. Like I looked at it and it was just like something happening on the screen, and I never could really feel for it until my kids were taken and I went through the process, and I start to just feel totally and utterly depressed and dejected that no matter what I do, my children are never going to be the same. No matter what I do, we're never going to get our kids back, and it's just hopeless. And life is over, period.
And hearing
and
you
that
say
must have been
that-
what happened to those people. And why is it that a government in 2008 is still doing the same thing, emotionally devastating people that was happening back in 1938 to 45? Why is it that the so-called militaristic governments in South America, where they go in and they just execute people because they spoke out against the government, and yet here they're doing the exact same thing? Maybe they're not taking us out and shooting us, but I'll tell you, it would be a lot nicer to be taken out and shot, and at least you wouldn't have to live through the torment of watching your children being destroyed.
It's funny, last night you said something, and it was I stood there and watched them take the Jews, and
It's an old saying from came out of the Second World War, where this fellow was looking out his window, and one day he seen them come, and they took away the Jews on the block, but he didn't say anything because he wasn't Jewish. Then a few days later they came and they took the gypsy family away, but he wasn't a gypsy, so he didn't say anything. Then another couple of days and they came and they took the Italians away, but he wasn't Italian, so he didn't say anything. Then they came and took the Christians away, but he wasn't Christian, so he didn't say anything. And then one day they came and took him away, and there was no one left to say anything.
yeah,
And why
good
is
point.
it that we can't learn from our history? Why is it that society is doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Why is it that
Why is
we
it
allowed the government
people
to
don't-
devastate the native population,
Why is it that
okay,
people don't
and now we're
understand
doing
unless
it
happens to
on
them?
everyone else?
Why can't people? Last night you also said, and this was really hard for me. You were talking about the hopelessness that you felt in the feeling of not being able to do anything, and I related so much that it almost brought me to tears, because I feel that hopelessness. Because you think, well, what if I went and talked to this person, or what if I
Yeah.
went to around town and talked to all the MLAs? Maybe they would help me if I told them the ministry
But they won't,
did this and did that. No,
and they don't.
but you think, I wake up in the morning and I have these thoughts, well, I'll go do this today. And then I realize, no, fuck it. It's not going to work.
No matter
You know,
what
it's
you
just-
do, it's not going to do any good.
And I shouldn't swear, but
And
it really
and that's the
pisses
bottom
you off.
line. And that's the hopelessness of it. Is no matter what we do, it's not going to get our kids back. And even by some faint miracle of God, that in 10 years we manage to get our kids, they would never be the same.
Yeah.
Their prime years of conditioning, they're never going to be the same. Look at Colleen's kids. They want to go off and be drug dealers now. I mean, and she takes them into to a restaurant, and she's lucky to be able to even do that with their kids. Most of us never get beyond supervised visits, and what a joke that is. And what are they? They're rude, disgusting little monsters.
Hey.
Right? And,
well, you weren't
They
there,
were
so
misbehaved.
they were actually.
right?
That was
And that's
disgusting.
and
They were
what
Colleen, it was
happens is
disgusting.
everyone else in the restaurant looks at her
We're-
and thinks,
Yeah, everybody-
what sort
the
of mother
guy
are you
looking at me-
to be raising children like this?
Actually, you're right, because there was, first of all, the waitress came to the table, and one of the boys said something so rude to her, and the waitress looked at me like, aren't you going to do something? And I went like this, because what am I going to do? I'm not allowed to parent, because, you know, even though legally I'm still legally a parent, I'm not allowed to parent. And even if I was legally allowed, or was able to parent them somehow, their father would stop me. He's told them so many things about me, you know, and that's because of the decisions the ministry made. The decisions the ministry made have turned my children so against me.
In the
you know,
courts.
In the courts.
Yeah, and that's just it. And that's a thing that everyone who if you had your kids taken, you need to come to this realization. I mean, like, don't stop fighting. Keep taking them to court for as long as you can. Make them spend as much money as possible and delay it as long as possible. But come to the realization
And people
that no
stop
matter what you
consenting
do,
to things.
it's never going to happen.
Stop
right?
consenting.
And we need
Stop
to
opening
change
up your
the
door to
laws.
the ministry.
You don't have to let them in. Like we've said before, if they're going to apprehend your children, they're going to apprehend your children. If less people cooperated with them, then less people would suffer the consequences of cooperating. Because there are consequences. A friend of ours, I kept telling her, don't give out the, you know, don't sign a consent. She signed a consent saying that the social worker could go talk to the teachers, the doctors, because she had nothing to hide. And I've said this before on an earlier video, but only recently did that poor woman finally lose her children to the social workers who she trusted, who for a year were actually investigating her and leading her to believe they closed their file. They weren't going to apprehend her children. You don't have to set yourself up for failure like that. Stop consenting to agreements that you don't agree with.